Australian Citizens Party sounds the charge for the next election, defeating the banks in their war on cash, and who is committing elder abuse in the White House to start World War III? Coming up in this week's episode of the Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report. It's the 21st of November 2024. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by Citizens Party founder and leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's show, we're going to discuss the brilliant conference we had on Sunday, which was our policy launch, our national policy launch for the 2025 federal election.
I believe it's going up on YouTube tonight, today as we speak.
Yes. We have brilliant news in the war on cash, which we are winning, and it could be better, and I'll make that point, but nevertheless, we've stopped the banks from eradicating cash. And the very bad news, though, is what the massive escalation this week with the Americans allowing Russia to fire their missiles, allowing Ukraine to fire American-made missiles guided by America into Russia, which is a direct attack on Russia by the United States, which is what they've tried to avoid for 2 years. And this geriatric, decrepit man in the White House is blowing the world up on his way out, except, of course, that's implausible. Someone else is using him to do that. Nevertheless, people have to be extremely aware of how serious this is. So we'll get into all that. First, though, remember, this is not just information. It's about changing the things we're talking about, and you can help. And one of the ways to help is get the word out. And we present the word here. You help us get it out by helping get more people to see it. You can do that by liking the show, sharing it through all social media. Subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and if you do, remember to ring the bell icon. Please comment below. The feedback is invaluable, and I try and engage as time allows. So definitely do that. We're interested in what you have to say. And of course, there's a donate button as well where you can help support the work of the Citizens Party, because it never ends. And we kick goals. And I did a speech about that on the weekend, and you can watch that to see what I'm talking about. But Craig, let's get straight into it, because we've got a lot to cover, and we're kind of still
Getting over.
When you have a conference like we did on Sunday, it takes a lot of work to pull it off. So then afterwards, anyway. So Australian Citizens Party sounds the charge for the next election. The conference was called Return Government to the People, Take Back National and Economic Sovereignty. And what we did is we assembled a lineup of speakers who could all speak from an expert standpoint to the various elements of our platform, or the parts of our platform that we highlight on the day, but specifically to these themes of taking back national and economic sovereignty. National sovereignty, by which we mean the Australian people decide what Australia does as a nation, including on foreign policy. And the first panel was we need an independent foreign policy. And that was addressed by former Ambassador John Lander, a representative of the Chinese community, Richard Yuan, who was able to talk about it from an Australian-Chinese standpoint, because, of course, the big issue with our foreign policy is, are we going to allow ourselves to be talking to a war with China? There was a representative of Australian Muslims, Aisha Novakovic, gave a brilliant speech on how the government of Australia has to stay in lockstep with the Americans on the question of Gaza, because we don't have an independent foreign policy. And what that does, it means Australians who are concerned about that, and especially people who are Palestinians or of the Muslim faith, etc., they end up feeling completely betrayed, right? Because it's not even that the government may disagree with them. They know their government can't represent them, right? And anyways, that was very powerful. The other part of sovereignty is economic sovereignty, and economic sovereignty comes down to, can we, the people of Australia, hold the government accountable for the things that it fails to do that it should be doing in the economy for the people. And no, we can't, because the government has outsourced those functions to private corporations, right? We're a corporatised state. It outsourced those functions to private, and that means we aren't in charge. No. You can jump up and down as much as you like, and all you get from the politicians is, oh, there's nothing we can do. So we keep getting smashed on electricity prices, smashed on food prices from the Coles Woolies duopoly, right? Smashed on the gas price because the government is at the, subservient to the gas cartel. All those sort of things, and it reflects the corporatisation of our economy. And then we had an impressive lineup of speakers who were able to speak to those. And as you said, Craig, we're going to be putting all the videos up by the end of this week. So watch the show, but then over time, go back and look at those presentations that you'll see. John Adams is already up, the independent economist. We gave him 20 minutes, he took 45, but he carried the audience really well. It was quite exciting to hear his account of the battle with ASIC. He spoke on Abolish and Replace ASIC. Dr. Andy Schmulo from the University of Wollongong spoke in a very hard-hitting way about how you really got to take on the banks. He exemplifies how you should take on the banks. And then we had other great speakers such as John Shipton, who's the father of Julian Assange.
I think the theme, Robbie, of return government to the people is the issue, because it is the case that we've had policies in the past which worked.
Yeah.
And we're saying, just go back to the policies that worked. Look at the issues that were promoted in the past before we got into this whole neoliberalism, globalist agenda. Let's go back to them. And that's what we've highlighted through this conference, which was absolutely excellent, because John Lander has been a veteran diplomat. He knows, and he said to me, he's very shocked that all his good work is being unravelled.
Yeah.
And this is what's happening, is that the neocons in the United States, which have got the Australian government by the nose, and the neoliberal policies that are flooding the world, are causing a massive backlash. And it's in Australia too. Have a look at the recent victory by Donald Trump, a landslide in the United States, but the major media was saying, oh no, it's going to be very, very close. Yeah. Right? So it
wasn't close at all.
That wasn't close at all, because the people are, in a sense, wanting change. They've had enough of these policies, and we've said this all along down here, that people need an actual real alternative, and that's what we're putting forward. You won't find little nickel and diming policies from the Citizens Party.
No.
We are not into that. If you're worried about minor issues that don't affect the general welfare of the population as a whole, then don't come to the Citizens Party, because we don't talk about those things. Not that they're not important, but when we go to an election campaign, we go to the election campaign with the most important policies first.
And the things that we believe, Craig, the whole country should literally unify around. Like the things, when it comes to the way government should serve the people, that should be a 100% vote. Right? Mm. What happens is the vested interests come in and play divide and conquer, right? And they get people focusing on these other issues, which are not the fundamental issues. And so then people end up treating each other like they're enemies. And what we're trying to say with our approach is, look, we can agree on these fundamental things. Let's get the system changed. And what we're going after is the structure. That's why we talk about sovereignty. We're talking about, you can have it, just say you're a Liberal. Obviously you're going to fundamentally disagree with the Greens on almost everything. But what you should be able to agree with the Greens on is that whoever wins your argument in a fair election should be able to implement their policies, because we actually have real sovereignty. But if it doesn't matter who wins your argument, because someone else is always going to be in charge, then that's the fundamental problem that we've got to fix. Yep. Right? That's what it comes down to, and that's what we're trying to identify. And we do identify them. We've exposed them our whole history as a party. And that's why we go after the banks so much, etc., and these big foreign policy questions, because it's so tragic that we do not have an independent voice on foreign policy, and that is a country that has no sovereignty whatsoever.
Robbie, if people want to call in, they can get a copy of the book that we produced
Yep.
for the conference. This has got the agenda on it, which will then reference what's on the internet. It's also got our policies in it that we've printed out. These are everyone who came, close to 200 people, all got a copy of this. So if people want it, call the 1-800 number. It should be on your screen, and we'll send it to you. Because I mean, it's that way you can get a copy of all our policies in one place.
Yeah. Now, watch this space, because, like I said, this was sounding the charge for the election, right? So we've had our policy launch. We will be rolling out announcements of candidates thick and fast to contest the election for those policies. I'm already a declared candidate for the Senate here in Victoria, and you know, there's going to be. We'll just keep pushing the case. The election most likely is May next year, but it actually could be earlier. So, apart from the natural, you know, Christmas summer break, we are hitting the ground running on this stuff, and you can participate in that. And if you want to, get in touch with us. There's literature you can already start putting out, etc., to get the message out. Because that's the main, actually, our number one challenge is recognition. Because we get some media coverage, we don't get the media coverage we deserve, and you can help with that by helping us spread the word.
In here we've got a flyer, right? It's called "Who Are the Citizens Party?" Whatever they've done for you. We're about to print 250,000 of them to get them out Australia-wide, and that'll be a major part of our, you know, building our public awareness for the next period of time. So when I founded the Citizens Party 36 years ago, we had the idea that candidates, elected members of parliament, should be totally sovereign. They shouldn't be beholden to any vested interests, any secret groups, nothing whatsoever. And we actually, the way that we approach elections is that we say to people that want to stand for the policies that we represent, that we're taking forward to the election, if you agree with these policies and you want to represent them, then the Citizens Party can support you. Like it's like not an independent that doesn't have a party machine behind them, but a person who wishes to stand up and say, I represent these policies, and that's basically what you talk about. Doesn't stop a person talking about other issues.
Sure. And
that's the whole thing. It's like an independent being supported by a party. Not a political party hack like you've got in the major parties, but we want people of integrity to stand up and fight for these sorts of policies.
Yep.
And take them forward as widely as we can around the country. So if you've got any interest in that, we can always talk about it and see where it goes. But that's the difference between the Citizens Party and most of the other major political parties. We're after people of integrity, people that want to fight for the country, people fight for the common good and for the general welfare of the population first and foremost. It's a very difficult prospect to get elected. In this country. It's deliberate, and they're going to make it worse with these new electoral laws that are coming in. I mean, I just had the benefit of watching Anne Toomey, the constitutional lawyer, talk about these things. I think it's a deliberate ploy to put the issue off the agenda.
Right.
Because this stuff, from what she's just said, there's so many holes in this law, it's going to get knocked out in the High Court, because this idea of the implied issue of freedom of political expression, it's been just thrown out everywhere by the fact that this completely is a biased law relating to the major political parties. And it's so transparent that that's what's going on. I think it'll be very, very lucky if it gets through the High Court.
Well, and it's one of two things, Craig, that's up before Parliament at the moment, which is all about the two major parties trying to lock out the growing threat to their lock-on power, which they have a power-sharing relationship, right? We call them the uni party. The other one, of course, is the MAD bill. Now, don't be fooled by the Liberals. The Liberals initiated the MAD bill, the misinformation, disinformation bill. It's just they're a bit smarter than Labor sometimes on this stuff. And as soon as they saw the massive backlash of 24,000 submissions to the exposure draft, they just jumped off it straight away, right? They do want to get re-elected. Labor hasn't seen the writing on the wall, and they're still pushing it. But the intention of that bill is to shut down social media, which has done so much to give alternative to the major parties a voice. And as a result of, in the social media era, the crossbench in Parliament has got bigger and bigger and bigger. So they want to shut that down. These electoral reformers, they want to rig the system to only suit them as the two major parties. Whenever they vote on something together, it always stinks.
Yes,
right?
And one of the classic examples from Anne Toomey, she says, they're talking about electoral donation caps of 20,000. actually, when you read the law and you go through all the machinations of how that works, 2.9 million is actually what you can contribute to a major, just to a major political party.
Yes.
But to an independent or to small parties,
Yeah.
it's only 20,000.
20,000.
But 2.9, if you go, and all these, you know, these Labor Party clubs that are associated
Yep.
with it, all the exemptions are incredible. That the point is that this is very, very, very clearly an idea to entrench the two-party system, and I don't think it's going to work. But it's typical of what the Labor Party and the Liberal Party is doing. They speak with forked tongues.
Well, we just need to
most
take
of
it
the
as
time.
proof that this is what we're up against, right? This is the structural problem we're up against, and be more motivated to do something about it.
Well, I think that's the other thing, Robbie. When I look at this, I'm thinking, well, how does this affect the Citizens Party? Our model is completely different, right? We don't get $20,000 donations, or we might get one in a blue moon. They don't come around very often. But what we get is thousands, 15 to 20,000 individual small contributions from people on a regular yearly basis, every year. So our model is that we try and
So it's a
spend
lot broader, and therefore it can't just be knocked over.
and we try and spend as much money on campaigns as we can, but that's a pretty difficult operation when you spend, you know, we're a full-time political operation, and what you've seen with all the different responses and victories that we've had over the last several years, that's a result of consistent hard work continually day in and day out, which we fund ourselves, not through the electoral allowances that go to the elected members who do it through
not
the
from
electorate
corporations, not from unions, and not from the government through those
Big
means.
difference. So we're fully independent. We're economic. We're fully independent. We have an independent political policy.
We're the most democratically funded party in Australia.
That's correct.
That's why we wrote that pamphlet. Who are the Citizens Party and what have they ever done for you? Because you should have been hearing about us every day of your life for the last 30 years, based on our results and our support in the community. But instead, the media's blacked us out.
And we do have a policy that will ban political donations by any corporate entity, any union, and only the people that can contribute are private citizens.
Only voters should be able to contribute to political parties.
Which that means that you reinforce the idea of a democracy.
Yep. Now, just before we move on, one announcement is on the MAD bill, because we're going to discuss something else in a second. As of now, the numbers are there to defeat it. So the numbers were pretty much accounted for on Saturday last week when Senator Allman-Payne came out and said she wasn't going to vote for it, and that made the numbers 38-38. Now, one senator who actually had initially said he was going to vote for it, which is Senator David Van, he has said 2 days ago now that he's changed his mind and he's not going to vote for it. And that means it's 39-37, and the government is going to lose this vote unless, when they ring the bells and they allow 4 minutes for the senators to get to the chamber, someone gets stuck in the toilet or trips over their shoelaces.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Maybe people should call their member in the Liberal Party and say, please do up your shoelaces.
Please do up your shoelaces.
So you don't trip over on your way for the vote.
And someone in Parliament expressed this fear to me, Craig, because he reminded me that it was the Liberals who instigated this. So some Liberals might still secretly harbour the desire this passes, right? And they mysteriously fail to make it in time for the vote, which would be a totally dirty trick, but Parliament, that does happen in Parliament. Anyway, the good news is we have got it to this point where we are about to defeat it. Click on the link below to our press release this week, though, because just to make sure, keep the pressure on the Greens. It's insane that we're at this point and the Greens haven't made an announcement one way or the other which way they're going to vote. The message we put in the press release is just take an issue that the Greens are sympathetic to, such as Gaza. All year, the pro-Israel element in politics has been hysterical in their attacks on social media, especially TikTok, for revealing what's actually happening in Gaza. If they had a chance, they would shut it down. And how can the Greens possibly vote for a bill that would give them the power to do that, right? This is like, it's free speech 101, and you can ram that point home to them. And we have the link there to also to Professor Ann Toomey's explanation of the MAD bill, which shows it absolutely will censor political opinion, and get that to them as well, all right? But otherwise, do it with some confidence, because unless some real dirty trick happens and the government's is through completely foul means able to pull out some miracle, we've got this terrible bill defeated and you've played a role in that. All right, Craig, now let's move on to some other good news. Defeating the banks in their war on cash. And the big announcement there is Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, has made 2 announcements over the weekend, both of which are the byproduct of the enormous campaign we ran with the Senate inquiry into bank closures in regional Australia. Because that became such a big inquiry and looked at these issues so deeply. It showed the banks were liars. It showed the need for cash in the community is enormous, especially in regional Australia, but not just in regional Australia. It proved all that. So all this narrative coming from the banks and the Banking Association was totally destroyed by that. And it's left the government with no choice but to know that they have to address this. And so they've made some announcements which showed that, okay, we're going to address this. So we'll focus on the positive first because we'll save a little bit of criticism for later. First one is a bank levy. And what they're proposed to do is put a levy on banks that close branches and have the fewest branches in relation to their deposit base to pay to the banks that maintain branches and have the most branches relative to their deposit base. And so that levy can help the banks that have branches keep them open, right? So that's a variation of a recommendation that was in the Senate inquiry. However, it's different in a significant way. The Senate inquiry recommendation was to say there's an existing levy on the big 4 banks of $1.6 billion, jack it up 10%, so an extra $160 million, to help communities actually open community banks. Community banks were all the rage 25 years ago when banks were closing down, and so you had Bendigo Community Banks and others. All the communities like Shoebridge that were left with no bank in the last few years, they've all looked at the community bank option, way too expensive now. And Bendigo Bank said to Shoebridge, you've got to guarantee $100 million in loans and stuff like that. And the community couldn't do that, right? So they can't come up with the money that the banks say would be necessary. So this was Senator Matt Canavan's recommendation. Okay, make the banks contribute to a pool so that communities can replace them when they leave with community banks. He also wanted that money to be invested in Bank at Post, right? Because the banks are underfunding Bank at Post, and he said put that money into Bank at Post as well. So that was his idea, and that would have gone on to the big 4 banks, who are the ones who 106 extra. Now they pay a levy now of 1.6 billion. It'll be 160 million. They will squeal like stuck pigs, squeal. But remember that total of 1.76 billion will be out of more than 30 billion in net profit. So let them squeal. Nothing's working if they're not squealing, trust me. But we'll see. Chalmers has made this announcement and he has this variation of it. Now we'll put a post on the screen here by Dr. Andy Schmulo. He was scathing on LinkedIn about this. He described it as, we'll read the the viewer can see the actual language. I tempered it for our press release. Once again, Federal Treasury storms in and stuffs the joint. The same Treasury that produces the most badly drafted legislation in the Western world. These monkeys have come up with a carbon-like levy brain fart. Under this idiotic scheme, banks will trade bush credits, lack of presence traded with those with a presence, then horse traded to $1 amount, which over time will be reduced in quantum thanks to the incessant whining of the Australian Banking Association. Instead of actually establishing more branches in the bush, pathetic. So that was a scathing criticism, and he's dead right. The positive is that this is, like from a political standpoint, this is another sign we've forced the government to know it's got to be seen to be addressing this issue, except what it's coming up with is quite lame. And it highlights what it's not coming up with, Craig.
Yep.
What it hasn't done is respond to the Senate inquiry within 90 days as it's required to. So when a Senate inquiry hands down a report, there's 90 days for the government to respond. 90 days was up with this Senate inquiry ages ago. They still haven't responded. There's a sitting on Parliament right now. In the last sitting a few weeks ago, Senator Gerard Rennick put forward a motion which passed calling on the government to respond. This sitting, he's putting up a order for the production of documents motion to demand the government hand over its response, even though the government doesn't have one yet. Because they don't want to make the process transparent. What they should be responding to is the question, okay, what about the first three recommendations, the big one? The first one says make access to banking and cash an essential service. What's the government's response to that? Make it transparent. The second one says establish an expert panel to look into a government bank, and the postal bank version of a government bank. Where's the actual response to that in a formal, transparent way? And the third one is make the banking code of practice compulsory instead of voluntary, right? Where's the government's response to that? So they're fiddling around the edges a bit, but that's their way of showing us that they know they have to be seen to be doing something, but as usual, they're doing it in a pretty pathetic way. The second announcement is actually quite positive, but again, doesn't go far enough. So what the government has announced is it almost ends the war on cash. Can I say, why am I saying that? The banks in their wildest fantasies did want to get rid of all cash. They wanted a totally digital banking system where no cash is used at all. The Reserve Bank in 2021, because it's in league with the banks, actually gave this away when it did a study into a central bank digital currency, and it was suggesting they might do a pilot project. But the Reserve Bank said if they went down the path of a central bank digital currency, they wouldn't maintain both a digital currency and a physical currency. Now, at the time, we said, well, hang on, why? It's not your choice to make that decision. If you love a central bank digital currency so much, you could maintain both. There's no reason you couldn't maintain a physical one. But that's what they said. They said that to reflect what the bank's fantasy was. Mm. The announcement that Jim Chalmers made this week is that all businesses that sell essential goods and services, so supermarkets, fuel stations, etc., must accept cash.
And banks.
Well, they are essential businesses, and the question is, yes, will it apply to banks? Will ANZ's cashless branches now have to go back to accepting cash? Right? So that'll be a test for the government. But it does mean if that's going to be a mandate, then there's a level below which the banks will not be able to get rid of cash. Right? There will always be cash in the system. That's great. Where it's weak is they exempted small businesses from this mandate as if it was some kind of, they didn't want to be burdensome on small business. The problem is they're undermining the principle of legal tender. Right? Bob Catter and Andrew G put up a bill earlier in the year to mandate all businesses accept cash, and they included exemptions in their bill, specific exemptions, because there are some reasonable grounds sometimes in rare cases. What the government has done here is made a blanket exemption for small business, and for no good reason. Right? Don't tell a Labor government is suddenly first and foremost concerned about small business. I don't think so. What they're trying to do is still feed into the bank's system where the banks can still get as many digital transactions as possible to get that cut. Yep. Right? $4 billion in fees flows into the banks on this now.
Well, the good news, Robbie, is the Citizens Party, A, is not a small business.
No.
And 2, will never not take cash. So
never.
People want to give us cash, we'll happily take as much as they'd like to give us. And I'm speaking as a treasurer now.
That's right. So that's right.
That's good news in the sense of, but as you say, it just hasn't gone far enough. I mean, the point is that, I think there's been more and more small businesses go back to cash because of the demand of their customers. It's going to be the customers directing this, and I don't think small businesses are going to be able to get away with going completely cashless because there's too many people that want to use cash.
I'll tell you an interesting statistic that the government revealed in announcing this, that the number of, the whole narrative has been no one uses cash. Cash use has dropped to all-time record lows. Only 13% of the public use cash. et cetera, et cetera. The government announced that the number of businesses not accepting cash had gone from, accepting cash had gone from 100% or 99% in a certain period of time, maybe over a decade or something, down to 94%. So only 5% of businesses stopped accepting cash. And we were being told that, oh no, cash is out of vogue. Absolute rubbish. Anyway, so look on the bright side. So, you know, you feel that you're dragging these governments to do the right thing, and we are. They're not doing it voluntarily, but the positive part of that is that means that what we're doing is working. And we're not satisfied with how weak they're being, but we're the ones that are dragging them in the right direction, right? And this is what citizen engagement is all about. You can't just vote every 3 years and sit on your hands and go, wham, 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 why aren't they reflecting my views? Get in there and work with the Citizens Party, right? And you can actually force them to budge on these things, and sometimes do more than budge. So anyway, we are defeating the banks in their war on cash. All right, Craig, finally, who is committing elder abuse in the White House to start World War III? And this is a deadly serious conversation, because right now the world is closer to nuclear war than probably it's ever been. And what's really alarming about this is all through the Cold War, when there was a couple of instances, a couple of times there when it came close, everybody on both sides took the danger seriously. What's the problem now is the people that have pushed it to this point now, they're telling you, oh, don't take it seriously. Ha, 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 Russia is bluffing, etc. What am I talking about? President Joe Biden, US President Joe Biden, has finally approved Ukraine to fire long-range American missiles deep into Russian territory, which require American guidance for the firing.
This was on the table 2 months ago, back in the middle of September.
And they resisted it?
And the UK Prime Minister flew over to try and push and provoke Joe Biden into approving it back then. But Joe Biden obviously got advice from inside the US government, the military circles, and he canned the idea. Russia, however, said this is going to be inevitable, because they could see there's forces behind Joe Biden pushing this in a way that now, finally, he's sort of relented. But I mean, the guy should be in a nursing home, not running a country.
Well, so let's get on to that in a second. Russia, just follow through what you just said, Russia changed its nuclear threshold, its doctrine, to a doctrine where previously it said it would only use nuclear weapons against a nuclear state that was a threat to it. Now it says it will use its nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear state if that non-nuclear state is working with a nuclear state to threaten Russia. And that's the formulation for what Ukraine has done. And like I said, what's really insane is the people saying, oh, no, Russia's bluffing. You don't make bets about that when you're talking about nuclear weapons. But let's go back to what you just said. So up until this week, Biden resisted this. The American White House resisted this, and then suddenly they do it. After the US election, where one of the clear things Trump was elected on was bringing an end to this war, right, by actually forcing a negotiation which America has blocked up until now. And so Trump has a mandate on that. He has an actual electoral mandate, and is Biden trying to blow up the world on the way out? Well, who's Biden? I want to play a clip. Everyone's would have seen lots of clips over the last year of the decrepit geriatric Joe Biden. This is the latest one, and it's kind of bizarre, because this is him in Brazil, where where he attended the G20 meeting. And so he gives a press conference in the jungle, and you can see the path behind him as he's wrapping up this press conference. And then he turns around to walk off. Just look at the way he walks. Now, that's just the latest, Craig. This guy is decrepit.
Yeah.
This guy does not have his marbles.
No.
right? He is not the guy that just made this decision. Someone else, the Russians know that, someone else made this decision. This is not a democratic country, people, that we're allied with. I hope you understand that. It is not. There is a cabal behind the scenes that's controlling the man in the White House, the man who has the constitutional power, who just doesn't have the faculties anymore.
Ironically, Trump identified that in one of his latest videos, calling the fact that Biden is pushing the world to to thermonuclear Armageddon, and he refers to this idea that the United States is actually a dictatorship, but not by by the military-industrial complex and the neocons and so forth. He actually identified it, which is the first time, ever I've heard anything, of that nature come out of, a US president for a long time.
Well, there's a congressman in the House of Representatives in the United States who is, it reminds me of the story in the Bible of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. And if you know your Bible stories, and I know them pretty well, I was a Sunday school regular back in the day. Lot was the nephew of Noah, of Noah's Ark fame, and God decided to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because they were so sinful. And he told Noah he was going to do that. Noah said, "But my nephew Lot lives there, and he's a righteous man." And God says to Noah, "Well, I'll save Lot, Sodom if there's 100 righteous men." No, there's not 100. Well, if there's 50, no, there's not. There's not 50. If there's 10, no, there's not 10. If there's 5, no, there's not 5. There's only one righteous man, and that was Lot. Well, I reckon that's true for the US Congress. There's one righteous man in the US Congress, and his name is Representative Thomas Massie. Now, I'm saying that based on this guy's history. I remember back in 2015, 2016, our party was heavily involved in the fight to force the president, the US president, to declassify what was known as the 28 pages of the congressional report on 9/11, which had been classified relating to the funding of the operation, because those 28 pages named the Saudi Arabian government and all their ministers, including the ambassador, who actually funded the identified hijackers. So put aside whether you have a different view on how 9/11 happened, based on the official report of how it happened, they named hijackers. Well, they also actually, the Saudis were actually funding those hijackers. That campaign grew in power to the point where a bunch of congressmen broke with everyone else who was trying to keep it secret. And they went down, they were allowed as single congressmen to actually read the 28 pages before they were released. And Thomas Massie, I remember distinctly, he was one of them. He gave a press conference afterwards and he said this. He said, when you read those 28 pages, it forces you to rethink everything you think you know. And having seen him say that back in 2016, everything he has done ever since in the US Congress has been true to that fact. And where it shows up is over the last 3 or 4 years, the American Congress has passed all these ridiculous anti-China laws, and they are loopy. I mean, they're a bunch of mouth-frothing lunatics in the Congress, whipping themselves up in their own idiotic McCarthyism, and they're passing all sorts of bizarre laws, and every single congressman and woman votes for them. Like literally every single one. There's over 400 members of the US Congress, and it's 400 odd, with one exception to one. There's been about 5 votes where it's 400 plus to 1, and it's always 1. And it's always the same man, Representative Thomas Massie. And so, true to form, in response to what Joe Biden has done, Representative Thomas Massie has stepped forward, and he is now looking at what his power is as an individual congressman to impeach him, use the powers, articles of impeachment against Biden to try and stop World War III. And usually it takes a team effort, but apparently there's a way that an individual congressman can do it. And today, Thomas Massie tweeted this tweet, and we're going to play the video. But the point he makes with this tweet that you're about to see is that 2007 Joe Biden, in this video, calls for 2024 Joe Biden to be impeached. So this is Joe Biden in 2007 when George W. Bush and Dick Cheney wanted to start a war in Iran. And look at the absolute clarity with which 2007 Joe Biden attacked this decision.
But I want to ask you about something you've been involved with. You said that if the President of the United States had launched an attack on Iran without congressional approval, that would have been an impeachable offense. Do you want to review
Absolutely.
that comment you made? Well, how do you stand on that now?
Yes,
do you think
I do. I want to stand by that comment I made. The reason I made the comment was as a warning. The reason I don't say those things lightly, Chris. You've known me for a long time. I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee for 17 years, or its ranking member. I teach separation of powers and constitutional law. This is something I know. So I got together and brought a group of constitutional scholars together to write a piece that I'm going to deliver to the whole United States Senate, pointing out the president has no constitutional authority to take this nation to war against a country of 70 million people unless we're attacked or unless there is proof that we are about to be attacked. And if he does, I would move to impeach him. The House obviously has to do that, but I would lead an effort to impeach him. The reason for my doing that, I don't say it lightly. I say it because they should understand that what they were threatening, what they were saying, what was adding up to be, what looked like to the rest of the world what we're about to do, would be the most disastrous thing that could be done at this moment in our history that I can think of.
It's pretty clear, Robbie. I mean, the difference between, I was actually stunned when I saw this earlier, of just how clear and how, how much Joe Biden had his faculties back then compared to now. I mean, it's stunning.
Absolutely stunning.
And this guy's in charge of making decisions. He's not in charge of anything.
There's a conspiracy theory that the modern one is some kind of act. I actually don't believe that. He's just deteriorated really badly. And it just means that people can manipulate him quite a lot. But notice one of the things he was clear on in there. The only grounds for the US president to declare war is if America has been attacked or is in danger of being attacked. None of that applies to what's happening in Russia. None. Yet he has just committed an act of war against Russia, as have America's #1 partners in these crimes. In fact, the people who are more to blame, in my view, for stoking it up, which is the bloody Brits. The British over the centuries, Craig, mastered the art of starting wars for the sake of it. Didn't matter how many people they killed. They invented balance of power politics. And from offshore of Europe for centuries, whoever was becoming the dominant power in Europe, Britain would side with the second power and build that up to keep the dominant power in check, start a war and take them down, and then switch back. And over the centuries, just mass death. They didn't do it for moral reasons. It was literally just that. Right? And they want the world to run that way to this day.
It's a policy of empire, Robbie.
That's what it is. It is the foundation of empire. It is pure, unadulterated evil. It's the Henry Kissinger School of Politics now, but the British are the masters at this. And they are the biggest instigators of what's happening in Russia, because they have this deep hatred of the Russians going back centuries. And the Middle East. But anyway, so... they were the ones lobbying Biden to do this, and now their own missiles have been fired into Russia. They're called Storm Shadow missiles. But they wouldn't even be having a war if it wasn't for, the war would be over. It would have been over within 2 weeks if it wasn't for Boris Johnson in 2022, after when Zelensky and his government had initialed the agreement with Russia to end the war in a way that suited everybody. Boris Johnson went in there and said, no, you will not do that. And he went in there, with Biden's authorization as well. And consequently, so many people have died ever since. The Russian ambassador, this week in the UN, it was the 1,000 days commemoration of the start of the war. So the Russian ambassador gave a speech and said, well, you want to commemorate the 1,000 days since the war began. Let's commemorate the 950 days since Boris Johnson actually made sure so many Ukrainians would die by doing that. So what's happened, what I want to highlight now, and we'll put a link to this, there's an article by a British investigative journalist, Kit Clarenberg, who has described in detail the way the British have been operating here. I just want to read you the opening of the article. Leaked files show top UK military figures conspired to carry out the Kerch Bridge bombing, which is the bridge from Russia to Crimea. covertly train Gladio-style stay-behind forces in Ukraine, and groom the British public for a drop in living standards caused by the proxy war against Russia. Emails and internal documents reviewed by the Grey Zone, where this is published, reveal details of a cabal of British military and intelligence veterans which plotted to escalate and prolong the Ukraine proxy war at all costs. All costs meaning the lives of Ukrainians. Convened under the direction of the British Ministry of Defence in the immediate aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the cell referred to itself as Project Alchemy. As British leadership sabotaged peace talks between Kiev and Moscow, the cell put forward an array of plans to keep Ukraine fighting by imposing strategic dilemmas, costs and frictions upon Russia. And then Kit Clarenberg is an excellent investigative reporter. He was actually detained at the Heathrow Airport earlier this year or late last year, by the authorities to be intimidated for his reporting. But he has been blowing the whistle on how much it was the British that were goading Zelensky to demand Biden allow him to use these long-range missiles. And of course, the British would be in alliance with people inside the cabal that is controlling Biden at the moment. Craig, I thought the way we would end this is just to, because whenever we do a show like this and we cover, a significant subject like this one, you wish you could recap all the details for everybody so that they understood, the context all the time. If we've got a new viewer, they might be surprised that this might be the first time they've seen the Citizens Party. Hang on, you're saying Putin's not the devil, right? So I want to end this show just by playing a 6.5 minute video, and it's in the TikTok format, of one of the world's true experts on this, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And this video he just gives in 6 minutes the history of this conflict. So you can be left with no doubt why the side that we've supported with $1 billion, right, of Australian support as well, why we are the cause of this, and most of the world knows this, right? And if we don't actually own that and stop it from happening, and if Donald Trump does follow through on this, because that's always a bit of an if with him, but if he does follow through on this, instead of attacking him, applaud him, because the alternative is unthinkable, which is nuclear war. So run the tape on Professor Jeffrey Sachs.
This is not an attack by Putin on Ukraine in the way that we are told every day. This started in 1990, February 9th, 1990. James Baker III, our Secretary of State, said to Mikhail Gorbachev, NATO will not move 1 inch eastward if you agree to German unification, basically ending World War II. And Gorbachev said, that's very important. Yes, NATO doesn't move, and we agreed to German unification. The U.S. then cheated on this, already starting in 1994, when Clinton signed off on basically a plan to expand NATO all the way to Ukraine. This is when the so-called neocons took power, and Clinton was the first agent of this. And the expansion of NATO started in 1999 with Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic. At that point, Russia didn't much care. There was no border other than with the Königsberg, but other than that, there was no direct threat. Then the U.S. led the bombing of Serbia in 1999. That was bad, by the way, because that was a use of NATO to bomb a European capital, Belgrade, 78 straight days to break the country apart. The Russians didn't like that very much. But Putin became president, they swallowed it, they complained, but even Putin started out pro-European, pro-American, actually asked maybe we should join NATO when there was still the idea of some kind of mutually respectful relationship. Then 9/11 came, Then came Afghanistan, and the Russians said, yeah, we'll support you. We understand, to root out terror. But then came two other decisive actions. In 2002, the United States unilaterally walked out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. This was probably the most decisive event, never discussed in this context. But what it did was trigger the U.S. putting in missile systems in Eastern Europe that Russia views as a dire, direct threat. In 2004-05, we engaged in a soft regime change operation in Ukraine. But in 2009, Yanukovych won the election, and he became president, and in 2010, on the basis of neutrality for Ukraine. That calmed things down because the U.S. was pushing NATO, but the people of Ukraine on the opinion polls didn't even want to be in NATO. They knew that the country is divided between ethnic Ukrainian, ethnic Russian. What do we want with this? We want to stay away from your problems. So in February 22nd, 2014, the United States participated actively in the overthrow of Yanukovych. A typical U.S. regime change operation, have no doubt about it. And the Russians did us a favor. They intercepted a really ugly call between Victoria Nuland, my colleague at Columbia University now, between her and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat, who's a senior State Department official till today. And they talked about regime change. They said, who's going to be the next government? All of this is to say, the U.S. then said, okay, now NATO's really going to enlarge. And Putin kept saying, stop. You promised no NATO enlargement. It's been, by the way, I forgot to mention, in 2004, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, 7 more countries in the not 1 inch eastward. And then, okay, it's a long story, but the U.S. kept rejecting the basic idea, don't expand NATO to Russia's border in a context where we're putting in goddamn missile systems after breaking a treaty. 2019, we walked out of the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty. On December 15, 2021, Putin put on the table a draft Russia-U.S. security agreement. You can find it online. The basis of it is no NATO enlargement. I called the White House that next week after that, begging them, take the negotiations. Putin's offered something, avoid this war. Oh, Jeff, there's not going to be a war. Announce that NATO's not going to enlarge. Oh, don't worry, NATO's not going to enlarge. I said, oh, you're going to have a war over something that's not going to happen? Why don't you announce it? And he said, no, our policy is an open door. This is Jake Sullivan. Our policy is an open door policy. Open door for NATO enlargement. That is under the category of bullshit, by the way. You don't have your right to put your military bases anywhere you want and expect peace in this world. They turned down the negotiations. Then the special military operation started. And 5 days later, Zelensky says, okay, neutrality. And then the United States and Britain said, no way. You guys fight on. We got your back. We don't have your front. You're all going to die. But we got your back as we kept pushing them into the front lines. That's 600,000 deaths now of Ukrainians since Boris Johnson flew to Kyiv to tell them to be brave.
All right, Craig, well, I think that speaks for itself.
Yep, surely does.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Reminder to the viewer, please take the time as you can to watch the speeches from our conference as they're being posted. They're well worth it. So I recommend that and help us share them as widely as possible. Keep up the pressure on the Greens, and like I said, the link's below. Until next week, until you hear the absolute all clear that the bill has failed to pass, and that means we've actually won a victory for free speech in Australia. Otherwise, thanks for watching the Citizens Report today, and tune in next week for more.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.